like the present. I'm going to start. Ritz Hashem. So, we're on our 6th Shir Kanai Nahara of the series about the lemmas Asiyah, following this letter, this contrast, whatever you want to call it, from the Frierdiker Rebbe, which is very helpfully printed in this English translation entitled The Four Worlds from the Chasidic Heritage Series. So, yeah, we'll just continue from where we left off. It's a very exciting shir. It's very logical, not just giving lore and background, but it's very much about reasoning and understanding, which I can get ahead of myself, getting meta and describing the differences between this shir and other shirim. But the point is that it's exciting stuff to be working with. So last time we left off with a question that we described the four worlds, and we described how they're all spiritual worlds, even the world of Asiyah, even the world of action. It's still a spiritual perception of the lowest possible world that there is, but we have physical, which is, in a sense, below that. You would say Asiyah Gashmi, physical world of Asiyah. So once we establish the fact that all the worlds are spiritual, Frierdiker Rebbe said, a person might ask, what is the difference between all of the worlds? So a little bit reminiscent of a question that was asked all the way at the beginning, but not exactly, because at the end of the day, we understand and we appreciate the differences between all of the worlds. The question is really that even though we can make distinctions between different phenomena, different ways of relating to godliness, which is really what we said the four worlds are, Atzilus being a direct emanation of godliness, completely near to godliness, but at the same time still some form of an existence. Beriyah is a world of it's a proper existence, but it doesn't have any form whatsoever, just the very essence of existence. Yetzirah is, okay, well, now it has a form, but we're not focusing on the matter, and then Asiyah is we're focusing on the matter. The thing is that it's almost like if I would take a brick, and I would say that this brick, I could really describe in many ways. I could take this brick, and really, it has a weight, and it has a color, and all of these things. So I could say, yeah, those are describing the different worlds of the brick, but really, in essence, the main thing that I should be trying to express is that I have a brick, and I could describe a lot of details, a lot of adjectives about the brick, but ultimately, it's a brick. It's sitting in front of me. It's a brick. So the question really is, if we have all the spiritual aspects of the worlds, I could make a list of adjectives for the brick to describe the brick. I could say it's red, and I could say that it's, 2 by 1 feet. A very weirdly shaped brick. But I could say that it has, it weighs 2 kilograms or whatever it may be. Why is it that we decided, that Chassidus decided, that we have 4 worlds and that they're 4 distinct worlds? Seemingly, we just went through a bunch of details about what existence is. You have the form, and you have the matter, you have the basic existence, and you have the idea of its proximity to godliness. Seemingly, these are all just spiritual phenomena surrounding spiritual reality. Why is it that we've decided to divide it into 4 distinct worlds? So that is the question that we left off with last time, and now we get to answer that question. So the very short version of the answer, I think, is good to bear in mind, even though it's not even remotely enough to answer. That's why we're going to have a lot of teichen, a lot of content for this share. But the short version of the answer is that in our own lives, we actually perceive different spiritual realities. We'll get into how, what, where, when, but we do perceive different spiritual realities, and we can appreciate their distinctness. And seeing as we can appreciate the distinctness, there's for sure a better word for that. That's just slipping my mind. But seeing as we can appreciate how they are distinct, we're able to distinguish them. This concept translates over to the worlds of Asiyah, Yetzirah, Beriyah, and Atzilus. So, with here we could go on to the long answer of why is it that we actually distinguish between all of the lemmas Asiyah, instead of just saying, oh, well, that's a spiritual realm which has many different facets. So, we'll start reading inside. Physicality and spirituality are opposites. So it is not possible for human intellect, human intellect running on physical hardware, namely the brain, is not able to grasp spirituality in a way of chiyuvi, which I'll try to give a translation of that in a moment, we're only able to understand it in a way of shlila. So chiyuv and shlila means obligation and negation. That we can describe things with, I don't know, a lot of adjectives. Let's go back to the brick. We'll just use the brick as our object of discussion. So a brick, I can describe the brick as red. Or I could describe the brick as not blue. Red is not blue. Now it happens to be that we have a word for red. Not every society had a word for red, as it happens, not to get anthropological. But the brick could be red or it could be not blue. We could describe it in those two ways. So obligation is saying, now that I've given the brick the adjective of red, now the brick is red. Almost like it's obligated to be red. I don't know that this is necessarily the way to be giving it over, but essentially that's what a chiyuv means. That I've given a positive characteristic, a positive description, not saying that it has a lack of something. This is what it is. Shlila is saying that it's not blue. The brick is talking not blue. If I only knew the concept of the color blue, I could divide everything into a category of either blue or not blue, and it would be true. I haven't really given a description of what color the brick is by saying that it's blue, by saying that it's not blue. But I have told you that it's not blue. So that's chiyuv and shlila. So when we think about spirituality, we only have the physical world around us, which our brain runs on physicality. It's a physical machine is what the brain is. A very refined physical machine, but at the end of the day, the brain is a physical machine. So when we appreciate spirituality, we're not able to appreciate it in a way of obligation. That we're able to say that spirituality is this, spirituality is that. The only thing that we can actually describe spirituality as is a lack, an absence. That there's some phenomena that exists in physicality, we strip away that phenomenon, we can say spirituality is analogous to this phenomenon in physicality, but it's missing X, Y, and Z. Obligation and negation are two ways of understanding and of grasping things intellectually. Sometimes we understand things by way of, this is obligated. We look at the brick and we see that it's red. Sometimes we look at things and we appreciate what they're not. It's hard to describe a thing that you look at and you say what it's not. Usually we try to imagine that we have a good analogy for everything, but ultimately sometimes we do get caught up in thinking that certain things are just an absence. Obligatory understanding is in things which are physical. When we think about things in concrete terms, when we ascribe colors to things, for example, color or weight, whatever dimensions, so we're able to give over these obligatory understandings, that is to say, understandings through obligation. We're able to give it over to things that are, practically speaking, we recognize innately, intuitively, that they exist. Practically. When we understand things in a way that doesn't involve obligation, it's in a way of, it happens to things that we can't grasp physically. And we only recognize their truth in potential, but not in practicality. I mean, the classic example of this would be a spiritual matter. When, let's just talk about an angel, for example. When we say an angel, we say angels don't have physical bodies, right? Now, what kind of bodies do they have? We say spiritual bodies. What is a spiritual body? It's very hard to describe what a spiritual body is, because practically speaking, we don't have an analogy for it. Everything that I've encountered in this world, in my life, which is kind of large enough, but also quite small, but everything that I've encountered thus far in my life has been physical. Practically speaking. If it's been spiritual, my mind isn't able to process it, because my mind is physical, it doesn't exist in a physical world. I'm able to maybe ascribe details to it that are shlili. They're a lack of an obligation. I can say that whatever a spiritual body is, it's It's not physical. That much I know. I don't know exactly what it is. I can't say what it's made out of. I could describe different details, and it could even make perfect sense to me. You could learn angelology. I'm sure that's a discipline somewhere in some university. But I'm sure that a person could study Kabbalah really intensely, understand all of the details of an angel's body. But practically speaking, it's not something that they've ever experienced in a physical sense. Almost definitively, they've never experienced it in a physical sense. If they experienced it in a physical sense, it would be quite physical. But they're able to appreciate it, the potential of what the idea means, without it being a physical phenomenon. They're able to appreciate that in a way of shlila. It is properly a way of grasping something intellectually. The brain is really able to take a null set and not imagine something beyond that. Just to give a very grub example, the concept of a negative number is a concept which doesn't actually exist. The concept exists, but you can't have physically a negative amount of dollar bills in your pocket. Now, we describe things in terms of negative numbers. We describe things in terms of a shlila, but we can't imagine an actual absence. If this is all making sense, I hope it is. But the point is that spiritual things definitely are things that we cannot describe in physical terms. The only thing that we could do is we could try to give a physical analogy and strip away details from the physical until we arrive at what the spiritual is. And yeah. Spirituality has space and time the same way that physicality does. They're different in their levels. That is to say, not Bahadar Gasam, Bahagdarasam, in their definitions. The Agdaras Hazman Umokim Diruchmi, Eno Klal Kagdaras Hazman Umokim Hagashmi. The parameters of spiritual time and space are not at all similar to the parameters of physical time and space. And the Frierdiker Rebbe goes on to explain. Hamokim Hagashmi Mugdar Ba'agdaras Shetach Umugbal Ba'agdaras Shishak Saves. Physical space is bound by spatial dimensions, and it's limited by the 6 sides. Up, down, right, left, forward, backwards. 3 dimensions meaning 6 sides. It's agreed to by all of the chikrim, by all of the physical investigators, the philosophers, whatever definition a person wants to give for chikrim, people that investigate things. That's really what a chikr is. So all of the investigators agree that above the Galgal Chi is, I'll get to that in a second later, but above the 9th Galgal is not physical time and space, but rather spiritual time and space. So, just to explain, classically people said that there are 9 heavenly spheres. They kind of stack on each other, like a matryoshka. They go one on top of the other, until the 9th one, the last one, is the one that has everything in it that's outside of our solar system. All of the 8 Galgalim, heavenly spheres, have within themselves different planets or what have you. But then the 9th one is the all-encompassing one, the one that contains everything else in the universe, the catch-all for everything that's not in our solar system. So what's outside of that 9th Galgal? So I don't know that physicists nowadays know the shape of the universe. I don't believe that they do. Be pretty cool if they figured that out. But ultimately, the Frierdiker Rebbe is at least going with the idea of this 9 Galgalim, where you have our solar system and essentially everything else, but the implication of having a 9th heavenly sphere is that heavenly sphere ends at some point. What happens? Does it loop back at the end? Does it just end? Is somehow some limitation in the universe that we can't go past there? I have no idea. I haven't been there. But ultimately, there's an idea that exists of what would be beyond the universe. Is there some kind of space beyond the universe? Can you go beyond the last distance that the universe can possibly contain? And so the Frierdiker Rebbe says that what the philosophers agree on is that if there's some kind of limit to the universe, that outside of that limit, you can imagine the theoretical idea of going beyond there. The universe might not allow for it because physicality is limited in that sense, if the universe is a limited space. But I imagine the universe is, 15 trillion light years large. Ultimately, I can imagine, okay, well, what happens if I go 15 and 1 trillion light years away? 15 trillion light years and 1 inch. I can imagine going there. But physicality doesn't allow for it. So there's that theoretical idea of space that exists outside of physical space. If there is some limit to the universe, which Chassidus generally posits that there is, that I can imagine going past that physical limit, even though it's not possible. Where am I going? I can't actually go there. That's what having a limit on the universe means. But I can go into spiritual space. The idea of space that isn't even allowed by physicality, but I can posit a notion of spiritual space. All of this is to bring out the point that there exists some kind of notion of space that might not actually fit into the universe. Nowadays, I would probably give the example of, 8th-dimensional spheres or whatnot. The whole thing of mathematics that they figured out the optimal packing for 8th-dimensional spheres, and it definitely has absolutely nothing to do with this year. So I'm not going to get into it. The point is that, we can imagine spaces that have no place in this universe. Maybe 8 dimensions, but I don't know. They have 20. They also solve for 24-dimensional spheres. Anyhow, ma'u lo zman v'lo makom. What is a lack of space or a lack of time? Hine sechlenu seichel ha'enoshi ha'sheichen v'me'ach chumri afshu chemer yesodak. Our minds, our human intellect, which dwells in a physical brain, even though the brain is very, very well refined. We cannot fathom what is a lack of time or a lack of space. We cannot imagine something that exists outside of the realm or the grasp of time. Everything that we interact with is contained within time and space. Something that does not contain any time or does not contain any space, we are not able to grasp it intellectually. So, I don't want to get ahead of myself, so I'm going to read a little bit more in Mr. Hashem, and then we're going to get back to some of these ideas. Seeing as we cannot grasp what is physical time and space, I can't imagine that if the universe is actually limited to 15 trillion light years. I can't imagine 15 trillion light years in 1 inch. With this fact, we still know very clearly. We know that the idea of space is not limited to merely 3 dimensions, or a 6-sided universe. It's possible to have a space which is not bound by the boundaries of space that we know that we live in. We could also imagine time functioning differently than the way that it seems to us. It happens to be time does function more than in a different way than most people perceived for thousands of years, at least according to relativity. And as I mentioned, we have many different concepts of space that exist outside of what's in the realm of possible in physicality. At the end of the day, we can imagine it. It's just not something that we can appreciate in a practical sense. We strip away details in order to make it work in our minds and our perception. So, just to kind of get to the idea of what we said, that we can't grasp anything that exists outside of space or time. So, the kind of nuniki question that I'm inclined to asking is, why can't I say a concept like 2 + 2 = 4 seemingly is a concept that exists independently of time and space? If the universe contained nothing within it, 2 + 2 = 4 would still hold true. Maybe yeah, maybe no. You have the classic debate about if math is discovered or invented. But at the end of the day, 2 + 2 = 4 seemingly holds true for whatever universe we're talking about, whether it contains time or not. That being said, I just want to clarify this point, that we don't have any way of describing the absence of time in 2 + 2 = 4. And it's very frustrating to try to describe an absence of time in the context of we're not able to describe an absence of time. What it would mean for 2 + 2 = 4 to exist above time is something that I cannot describe without getting into terms of time. The color blue I can describe without getting into the color red whatsoever. I can bring a blue swatch of paint, I can describe the wavelength, whatever it is. I can accurately give over that concept of the color blue without once getting into the concept of the color red. They're not mutual, they're not tied to each other, and yeah, it exists completely independently, basically. I cannot describe how 2 plus 2 exists above time without saying 2 plus 2 equals 4 exists above time. It's true that it's an idea. It's true that it probably exists above time. But my mind isn't grasping the timelessness of 2 plus 2 equals 4. Usually when I think 2 plus 2 equals 4, it is something that has to do with time. It's something that has to do with space. It's about physical things, or even if it's about spiritual ideas. But ultimately, it's going on in my mind. My mind is processing in time. My mind has processing time. My mind occupies physical space. These are all limitations that I have that mean that when I think about 2 plus 2 equals 4, I'm definitely not looking at the idea that theoretically 2 plus 2 equals 4 is unbound from time. But at the end of the day, even the unboundedness of 2 plus 2 equals 4 from time is still something that I can't describe without saying that it gets outside of time. I need to describe it in terms of time, and I can say maybe I'm taking away the fact that it has what to do with time. But still, I exist in time. I'm trying to strip away in my mind the idea of time from 2 plus 2 equals 4. But at the end of the day, I can't process something that exists outside of time. And it's very frustrating to try to describe. So I think I'm just going to leave it here. Hopefully this much is clear about the concept. So now the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to go, and he's going to do a very interesting thing, which is he's going to try to describe things to us in terms of axioms that it's a little bit of a cheat, because he's referencing physical reality. Normally when you're talking about very lofty mathematical concepts or whatever, you don't get into physical reality. But ultimately, we are talking about reality, and we are trying to give over ideas about practicality. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to use some axioms based on physical reality to prove his point. And it says, "Kulanu ke'echad yodim," we all know as one. Sheyesh lanu nefesh, we have a soul. And its powers act on the limbs of the body with different functions. Which translates to with pleasure, with will, with intellect, with understanding, with grasping intellectually, with love, with fear, with glorification, with thought, with I'm trying to think of a good meditation, perhaps, dibur, speech, and action. So these are all of the terms that the Frierdiker Rebbe listed. A lot of terms. He's going to divide them into 3 categories. But basically, we have a soul, and our soul interacts in many, many, many different ways with our body, in many capacities. So Kehos and nefesh, the powers of the soul, even though they are spiritual powers of the soul, they are devoid of physicality. With that point, we feel them. They have an effect on us. The effects of all of these things. Not only the fact that they confirm their own existence, not only the point that we're able to feel them, which gives us an innate and intuitive appreciation of their existence, but they also have so many different details that it's almost like they're calling out to us how they're different from each other. And the Frierdiker Rebbe gets into details. Intellect, with all of its 3 concepts, the very basic idea, understanding, and delving into what the idea is. It's able to give us an appreciation of its distinction, of what it is, and of its distinction from will and from pleasure. And also its distinction from emotions or from action. As it is with intellect, that what it does gives us an appreciation of what it is, and it gives us a form of what it's made of. This is also how it is with all of the abilities of the soul. In general, they're divided into 3 categories. Surrounding powers, internal powers. Some are patient, which essentially means passive, and some of them are felt, which is to say active. And servable faculties. They translate it over here as facilitative faculties. So anyhow, the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to get into all of these distinctions, all of these categories. The internal powers. These are powers which have specific body parts that we as humans use to express them. This is to say, this refers to intellect and emotions. Intellect, is housed in the brain, in the head. And emotions are felt in the heart, primarily. And they're different in what they are. Intellect is patient. And midas, emotions are animated. So that is the internal faculties. They're things which happen. They're not things that we do. We're about to get into that. They're things that we feel. And we feel them in different places in our body. I saw once a very interesting chart about different emotions and how it's felt across the body. But the point is that we normally think primarily with our brain, and we feel emotions primarily with our heart. And ultimately, they have their different ways that they express themselves. Intellect is more calm and calculated. Emotions are more intense and felt. They're more animated. So we were able to appreciate these differences. The Frierdiker Rebbe is really going into all of these details to describe in detail how these powers are really truly different. And then when he's gonna hammer in the last nail, and it's all gonna come together in Mitzvah the powers, which are the facilitative faculties, they call them, the cerebral faculties. They're only garments for the soul. These are thought, meditation, speech, and action. They don't have any standing of their own. Whether it's patiently or with action, with feeling. Seeing as they only exist as powers to serve, they change according to whatever is included in them. Whatever the thought is about, whatever the speech is about, whatever the action is about, ultimately, the thought will change based on, all the dimensions of the thought will change based on what is being thought about. If a person is thinking about what they want, it could be a very intense thought. It could be very all-encompassing. If a person is, just thinking about how to smear peanut butter on a piece of bread, there's probably not even that much going on. You could almost say it's Maisa. I mean, it's not Maisa because it's still the thought, but it's just a very passive muscle memory going on in the brain. The thought conforms to whatever the thought is servicing, whatever power the thought is servicing, whatever you're trying to do, that's what the thought conforms to. And the same thing is for speech. You're going to change what you're saying based on what you're trying to accomplish. And same thing with action. Pretty self-understood. And the Frierdiker Rebbe compares it to the way that you could have a garment. Let's say a gartel, for example. A belt is just a length of rope, essentially. You wrap it around your waist, and you could wrap it many, many times, or very few times, depending on how big the waist is. It'll just change based on who's wearing it. Or if you just wrap it around a set amount of times, it could be hanging, it could be trailing. The point is that thought, speech, and action will change according to whatever is invested in it. Just to be clear how this is distinct from what we said, intellect. There's a difference between intellect and the actual thought. Thinking is an active thing which is done. Intellect is an idea. The idea dwells in the mind. But it's not to say that a person necessarily fixated on the idea. It's not to say that they're actively thinking about the idea. The thought exists just there. It's there in the mind. It doesn't matter if it's being thought about. So the thought doesn't change according to who's thinking it. The thought, the essence of the truth of the idea, stays the same. Not the thought, the intellect, I should say. The intellect stays the same regardless of who's thinking it. 2 + 2 = 4 is going to be true whether it's thought by an animal, if there's an animal that's smart enough to do math, there are some of those, I believe, or if it's thought by a person. 2 + 2 = 4 is going to stay the same idea. The thought process is different for whoever's thinking about it and why they're thinking about it. So that's just the distinction between intellect and thought. But yeah, ultimately we have these different categories of things that we do. We're going to get into a few more for completion's sake. So, Ka'amar, actually maybe in a bit. Anyhow, Ka'amar, Asher Pa'ulis HaKirchis Misa'aris Lanu Es HaPei L'Meisan. The functions of the powers of the soul give us a picture of what's behind them. That's how we know the essence of the existence of all of these faculties of the soul. Seeing as we don't know the essence of what the powers are, we only appreciate them because we experience them. We don't know really what they are at their core. The only thing that we really know at our core is ourselves, hopefully, maybe to some extent. But what the powers of the soul are at their core, we don't really know. But the essence of the fact that they do exist, the essence of the fact that these faculties of the soul exist, that we do know, because we experience it. Seeing as we know the essence of the existence of the faculties of the soul, because we appreciate they exist, because we interact with them. It is perforce that we must say that they are limited. If they would be unlimited, bringing it back to the beginning, we would not be able to know them. Because that which is limited is not able to grasp that which is unlimited. We can only appreciate things by analogy with what we know. And seeing as we're able to appreciate the powers of the soul, this doesn't seem big yet because the Frierdiker Rebbe still hasn't tied it completely together. Second to last nail, I guess. But so far, what the Frierdiker Rebbe has demonstrated is that these powers of the soul, they exist not physically. The idea of intellect, which dwells in the mind, is not a physical thing. You don't dissect the brain and pull out different ideas. The intellect exists independently of physicality. 2 + 2 = 4 is going to hold true whether or not there's anyone to think it. And not to get into that whole other debate. If a tree falls in the forest, does it even make a sound? But ultimately, 2 + 2 = 4 exists independently of anyone thinking it. So it is a spiritual thing. But we appreciate intellect. We appreciate the whole faculty of intellect as it encompasses whatever ideas we may be able to contain within our minds. Seeing as this is the case, it must be that it's not completely unlimited, because there needs to be some kind of analogy with physicality. Physicality is inherently limited. Our brains take up a set amount of size, a set amount of space, a set amount of weight. It occupies a very set area in the universe, in all of its dimensions, in all of its descriptors that it may have. So ultimately, whatever idea we're able to appreciate, which we do appreciate the idea of intellect, very meta over here, we're able to intellectually appreciate the idea of intellect. Intellect must be limited in order for us to appreciate it, which we do because we appreciate it. Who, a very clear proof of this is the Mehus Metzius Hayedu Alanu Meir al Metzius Mehus Shu Mugbal. The essence of existence. This is going to get very complicated very quickly. If this wasn't complicated enough. So hopefully I'll just try to. There's a note from the Rebbe over here. It gets back to a different note from the Rebbe. I would really love to go into it, but I already I suspected that it would be going almost over time. And how much do we have? Not too much longer, but still I did want to try to keep it on time. Maybe I'll get back to it if somehow by some miracle we manage to finish within the time budget. But essentially, over here, what's important to appreciate is that there's 2 different ways that we can appreciate the existence of something. We can either appreciate the very essence of what the thing is, or we could appreciate just on a very basic level the base existence, that it exists. A decent example of this, I think, is when you meet a person. You appreciate that person exists. You shook their hand, you gotta know that they exist, unless they're a really good hologram. But when you meet a new person, you appreciate they exist. You definitely don't know the inner workings of their psyche. Now, if you're a therapist, perhaps, you can sit down with them for many, many sessions, and you could try to get into all of their inner workings. And then you could, also get a medical degree. And you can study their anatomy, and you can become a microbiologist, and you can just study all of the enzymes going on in their body. You can technically get all of the details, and maybe at some point you'll get to the full, proper appreciation of their entire existence. If it's possible for a human to appreciate another human in that way, I don't think so in a practical sense, but ultimately that would be the theoretical if you appreciate the entire existence. Hashem appreciates our entire existence. He made us from scratch. He knows every detail. Everything is with Hashgacha Pratis. Hashem appreciates the fullness of our existence. That would be appreciation of Mohos, of the essence of what it is. Metzius is just the basic of it exists. I've encountered it, I've interacted with it, I know thereby that it exists. So, bearing this in mind when we say this. So, I'll restart from the beginning of the paragraph with that in mind. Wrong paragraph. The essence of existence, which we exist, we know the concept of existence in a very real way, because it's for us, it's a part of us, we appreciate our existence. So the essence of existence, which is known to us, shows on the existence of an all-encompassing mahus, what it is in its entirety, that is limited. We're limited, and we know we can appreciate physical existence, or not just physical existence, we can appreciate existence, an existence which is limited, because we exist, and we're limited, and we appreciate ourselves. So we know truly that we exist, and we know truly our whole essence, so we know that you can have a whole essence which is limited, because we know about ourselves that we're limited. We can't say that the existence of that all-encompassing essence, which is to say, the mahus of the mahus. The Rebbe has a note over here, again, probably not going to end up getting to it, but maybe a supplementary thing. So, we can't say, I'm just going to skip this kind of bracketed line. We can't say that the existence of the essence is completely unlimited. And that somehow the existence of that thing will be limited. You can't say that something is both unlimited in theory if you really got to know it, but then its existence is limited. You can't have something that from one side is completely unlimited and from the other side is completely limited. What that is to say, not just two, points of view or ways of looking at it. That is to say, we're talking about the essence of the existence. You can't say that the existence of something is really completely everlasting. Elamai, only what detail I'm trying to add. Somehow it also contains within itself an infinity. If its essence is completely unlimited, its existence is unlimited. They can't be distinct from each other. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So and after the point that the essence of the existence is limited, so too, the essence of what it is limited as well. Very complicated, and if I take questions at the end, if it's something that I suspect I'll get questions on, I don't know if it'll be this, because it's very complicated. But that's essentially, just to recap that kind of thing, in very short, very brief, that if we can appreciate something, we know the concept of existence from ourselves. That's our analogy. That's our analog. Not just our existence. We appreciate our essence. So when we appreciate the essence of something, our analog for that is ourselves, and we are limited. And if we're able to appreciate the existence of something because we have an analog for our existence, or we have something analogous from our existence, we appreciate existence from our existence. We're limited. Our existence is limited. So if we can appreciate the existence of something else, it means that existence is limited. And if that existence is limited, then the essence of that thing must be limited as well. That's what we got to from this paragraph. Asher al-Kain. Hine kol ha-koiches hem mugdarim ba'agdaris gvuliyes nizmanu mokim gvuli. So all of the powers of the soul, going back to the powers of the soul, remember that. So all the powers of the soul are limited with limitations and boundaries of time and space. Because we exist and we have intellect and everything is misyachis to us, everything is contained within us. All of our soul's powers that we relate to, that we appreciate them, have what to do with us. And so they're bound by physical time and space. After the point that they're limited faculties, they have effects on physical limbs, which are made out of physical matter. But at the same time, we already got into the point that they're spiritual entities. And they're limited by physical time and space. So, just to kind of recap the flow of logic over here, is that we said anything that we're able to appreciate needs to have some relation to time and space, can't exist completely outside of time and space, because we can never ascribe a complete lack of time and space to anything in our minds, because our minds simply aren't able to process that. Then we said that we have faculties of our soul. The faculties of our soul are spiritual. They're not physical. They have an effect on the physical, which means that there's some kind of analogousness between them. But ultimately, they are completely spiritual. Then we said that they must be limited. They must be bound by time and space, not just completely out of bounds. And we explained that we're able to appreciate their essence, or we're able to appreciate their existence, which is something that we're only able to appreciate because we appreciate the existence of our essence, which gives us an analogy for existence, which means that we're able to appreciate their existence. And seeing as we're able to appreciate their existence, it must be that we have, even though we might not be able to fully encompass in our minds what it means to think, what it means to have an idea, but at the end of the day, we appreciate the existence of having an idea. And because we're able to appreciate the existence of all of these details, of intellect, or of will, or of pleasure, or of thought, we're able to appreciate all of these existences, means that, seeing as we're able to encompass it, means that it must exist with that connection to time and space. That's where we are so far. Very convoluted path that we've taken, but that's where we are so far. And now this is basically just to drive home the point. Even though they're different from each other, they're distinct. These powers of the soul, we already said that they're not one. You have many different faculties. They exist in different ways. Intellect and thought are two different universes. Beriyah split these and discards not just in the three categories that we gave, makifim, pimim, and musharsim. Some of them are all encompassing. Will and pleasure are things which encompass the entire body. Pimim are intellect and emotions, and musharsim like thought, speech, and action. Hi'im kol echad ma makifim, pimim, and musharsim, chalukim, echad v'silasa. Each faculty that exists within those categories, they're all completely distinct, each one from the other. B'chol zeh hinehim ruchnim, but at the same time, they're spiritual. If you remember what we're trying to get at from before, is that we need to show how you have distinctness between the four worlds. Why it is that we're describing them as being separate universes. We said, why not just call it all one and the same? Comes the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he hammers it home. He says that when we exist, we have all these faculties of the soul. All of these faculties of the soul are really different dimensions, different universes, if you will, that we can appreciate. There's different spiritual dimensions. Now, to get to that point, we don't necessarily look at it like that. We don't think, oh, the world of thought is a world of thought, and when I think a thought, I'm interacting with the world of thought. Really, we just interact, we think thoughts, and that's that. We do it without much of a second thought. But ultimately, it's its own universe. It exists within the bounds of it. It has its own time and space, and it's a spiritual entity. And the same thing with intellect, the same thing with will, and even with action, that when we endeavor to do an action, even when we practically do an action, that we're interacting with the physical world, but ultimately, physical action is an expression of our soul in a way that doesn't matter if something is actually happening in the physical world. Basically. So, the point is that we see this distinctness that exists. We wouldn't even appreciate that it's a distinctness in spirituality. To us, it's just, if I want to think, I need to do X, Y, and Z. I don't need to do much to have intellect, because either I have it or I don't. But if I want to think, I do X, Y, and Z. And if I want to speak, I speak, and it's a separate thing. I just think about the expression that I have. But the Frierdiker Rebbe brings out, and he says, no, it's not just the physical expression of however it turns out. It's the spiritual. The spiritual is also distinct. And we see that these are distinct spiritual entities, distinct spiritual worlds that we exist in, that we utilize in our day-to-day lives. And they're distinct. We don't lump them all together. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, with this you see that you can have whole spiritual dimensions that exist independently of each other. You don't just lump everything together as spiritual. You say that each thing has its own components, its own purpose, its own place. This was the point the Frierdiker Rebbe was trying to bring home. Just another paragraph, literally. So, v'hinei, with the fact that these powers are spiritual, and we are physical, with this, we still grasp the powers of our soul. And we know when we appreciate the essence of their existence. This is not just some vague idea that exists, that I'm trying to arbitrarily define world, so I want to give arbitrary definitions of worlds. It's not just some arbitrary thing. We appreciate it. It's a feeling. We feel this within ourselves. And with this, we're able to appreciate the difference between physical space and spiritual space. So that concludes the plan taken for today's share. Very intense. I suggest taking time to think about it. A lesson, I think it's always good to have a lesson. I think it's important. Everything in Chassidus needs to ultimately come down. It's almost getting ahead of myself for next week's share. But I think a good lesson for us that we can take out of this is that before getting into these concepts, the idea that when we think, really, you could break it down into this whole world of thought that we exist in, that we also exist in a world of action, and we also exist in a world of speech, and we also exist in a world of intellect, and of understanding, and of emotion, and that we exist in all of these different layers of spiritual reality all at once. It makes sense logically, but it's not the kind of thing that we necessarily think about in a day-to-day life. And honestly, we'd probably lose our minds very, very quickly if we tried to be conscious of every time that we have a thought. We're going to think, getting a little bit meta, we're going to think that, oh yeah, we exist in a world of thought and we're interacting right now in the world of thought. We'd probably lose our minds very, very quickly. But ultimately, we do exist in a world of thought and of speech and of action and of intellect and of emotion and of will and of pleasure. We exist in all of these places at once. So something that I think we can appreciate for ourselves also, as we're bringing about this other week, that when we exist in four worlds, Atzilus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. We didn't get into those four worlds over here per se. We discussed really very basic things, which we appreciate on a day-to-day basis. But we exist also in four worlds. And when we, for example, daven, stand Shemona Esrei, we're standing in Atzilus. Now, what that means, complicated, and we're already over on time by about 7 minutes. So, from the goal of, 40 minutes. So ultimately, we're holding a little bit, so I don't want to get too far into the concept. But when we stand on Shemona Esrei, we're standing in the world of Atzilus. Now, do we appreciate that? Probably not. The average person probably does not appreciate that. And again, if we'd appreciate that all the time, most people would probably lose their marbles very quickly. But ultimately, it's something that we can think about, that we can appreciate. The idea that, even though it might not seem obvious to us at face value, the same way that it doesn't seem obvious to us at face value that when we think of thought, we're interacting with the spiritual realm of thought. But we can appreciate that we exist in more levels than we might appreciate at face value. We can think about it every now and then to try to have an appreciation of just exactly how much we permeate so many different realities. I think it's a thing to meditate on, a thing to appreciate for ourselves, and obviously the drive for that should be how much we're able to affect in the world. We have in Tanya the concept of Hashem Tzilcha, that everything that we do, it's like the sun travels for millions and millions and millions of miles, and we move our hands, we make a shadow, and we're able to interrupt celestial motion that happens 93 million miles away. So everything that we do permeates so many different layers of reality. We should appreciate the effect of what we do, that every little thing that we do, even something that seems like a small thing that we've done relatively, but ultimately has massive, massive effects in the higher worlds. So yeah, that's the share. Any questions so far? Any questions now? All right, shkach.